The Manhattan skyline glittered against the evening sky as Maxwell Reed stood alone on the penthouse balcony of the Reed Tower. His silhouette, framed by the golden light of a setting sun, cast a long shadow across the marble floor. At 52, Maxwell had achieved what 3 generations of Reeds before him had worked toward: absolute financial dominance. The Reed Corporation, with roots in oil that had branched into technology, pharmaceuticals, and global real estate, was now valued at over $90 billion. Maxwell adjusted his custom-tailored suit and checked his Patek Philippe watch, a family heirloom passed down from his grandfather. In 30 minutes, he would address the company's board members and major shareholders at their annual gala. Another year of record profits to announce. Another reminder of his success. Yet, beneath the polished exterior, a storm was brewing. 3 hours earlier, Maxwell had sat in Dr. Harrison's office on the Upper East Side, listening as the specialist delivered the news with clinical precision. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed. After reviewing all your tests, I can confirm that you are infertile. There is no medical intervention that can reverse this condition." Maxwell had remained stoic, asking practical questions about second opinions and alternative options, maintaining the same composure he showed during hostile takeovers. But inside, foundations were crumbling. In the Reed family, legacy is everything. His father had told him repeatedly during his childhood, "Our name continues through our bloodline. Our achievements mean nothing if there's no one to inherit them." Now, staring out at the empire he had expanded, Maxwell felt the weight of those words. No heir, no continuation. The Reed line would end with him. His executive assistant, Victoria, slid open the glass door. "The car is ready, Mr. Reed. We should leave now to arrive on time." Maxwell nodded, following her to the private elevator. As they descended 80 floors, Victoria reviewed the evening's schedule, but her words seemed distant, as if coming through water. When they reached the lobby, security personnel formed a tight formation around him, guiding him to the waiting Rolls-Royce. The Metropolitan Museum's Temple of Dendur glowed with amber lighting as guests in formal attire mingled among ancient Egyptian artifacts. Board members approached Maxwell with practiced smiles and rehearsed compliments. He responded automatically, decades of business etiquette embedded in his muscle memory. "Magnificent quarter, Max," said Charles Whitman, his chief financial officer. "The Asian markets exceeded even our most optimistic projections." Maxwell nodded, sipping his untouched scotch. "Indeed." "Are you all right?" Charles asked, lowering his voice. "You seem distant." "Just processing some personal matters," Maxwell replied. "Nothing that concerns the company." But everything concerned the company. That was the truth Maxwell had lived by for as long as he could remember. The Reed Corporation was not just a business. It was the physical manifestation of his bloodline, his purpose. As the evening progressed, Maxwell felt increasingly suffocated by the opulence, the meaningless chatter, the artificial laughter. When it came time for his speech, he approached the podium mechanically. The words flowed, growth metrics, expansion plans, dividend increases, but they felt hollow, disconnected from the man speaking them. Halfway through, Maxwell paused. The room waited in respectful silence for their leader to continue. Instead, he closed his portfolio, offered a curt, "Thank you for your continued support," and stepped away from the microphone. The confused murmurs spread through the crowd as Maxwell moved swiftly toward the exit, ignoring Victoria's concerned calls. Outside, rain had begun to fall, cold November droplets that soaked through his expensive wool coat. He dismissed his driver with a wave and began walking, directionless at first, then with increasing purpose toward the East River. The city lights blurred through the rain as Maxwell followed the riverside path. For the first time in years, he was alone. No security, no assistance, no shareholders seeking favor. Just a man facing the stark reality of his mortality and the emptiness of his achievements. He reached a secluded section of the promenade where the water looked particularly dark and turbulent. Leaning against the railing, Maxwell stared into the depths. What was the point of it all? The acquisitions, the wealth, the power, if it all ended with him? If there was no son or daughter to carry forward not just the fortune, but the wisdom, the values, the name? The rain intensified, plastering his silver hair to his forehead. Maxwell's grip on the railing tightened as he leaned further over the edge, mesmerized by the churning water below. Whether he slipped on the wet surface or deliberately loosened his hold, Maxwell himself would later be unable to say. All he remembered was the sensation of falling, the shock of the freezing water, and then darkness. In that same moment, Amara Johnson was hurrying along the riverside path, clutching her worn leather satchel filled with student essays she'd promised to grade before morning. At 35, Amara had been teaching English literature at Riverside Community High School for over a decade. Despite the school's location in one of Brooklyn's most challenged neighborhoods, Amara had refused numerous offers to teach at better-funded institutions. "My students need me here," was her consistent response. Tonight, she had stayed late, running an evening literacy program for adults in the community. The rain had started as she was leaving the school, and without an umbrella, she had decided to take the riverside shortcut to her apartment. The splash caught her attention immediately, too large for debris, too deliberate for wildlife. Peering through the rain, Amara spotted a man's arm breaking the surface before disappearing again. Without hesitation, she dropped her satchel and kicked off her shoes. "Hold on," she shouted, though she knew the person couldn't hear her. Amara dove into the frigid water, the cold stealing her breath momentarily before training took over. A former collegiate swimmer, she moved powerfully through the current, reaching the spot where she had seen the arm. Diving beneath the surface, her hands found fabric, then an arm. With tremendous effort, she pulled the unconscious man toward the surface and began the difficult journey back to shore. By the time she dragged him onto the riverbank, Amara's limbs were numb with cold. The man wasn't breathing. She positioned him correctly and began chest compressions, counting steadily despite her exhaustion, pausing only to deliver rescue breaths. "Come on," she urged between breaths. "Stay with me." After what seemed like an eternity, the man convulsed, water spilling from his mouth as he gasped for air. In the distance, sirens wailed. Someone must have witnessed the rescue and called for help. As blue and red lights appeared on the promenade, Amara gathered her soaked satchel. The essays were ruined, but that hardly mattered now. The paramedics rushed toward them, equipment in hand. Amara provided quick details about what had happened, declining to give her name when asked. "He needs immediate medical attention," she said. "I'm fine." Before the paramedics could insist on examining her as well, Amara slipped away into the rainy night, shivering but determined to get home. She never saw the man's eyes flutter open briefly as they loaded him into the ambulance, never heard him whisper a question about the woman who had pulled him from the water. As Amara trudged home in wet clothes, her hand instinctively moved to her abdomen, a newly formed habit since discovering just 3 weeks ago that she was pregnant with twins. The father, a visiting professor she had briefly reconnected with from her university days, had disappeared upon hearing the news, blocking her number and returning to his home institution across the country. "We'll be okay," she whispered to her unborn children as she climbed the stairs to her modest apartment. "We always find a way." Meanwhile, Maxwell Reed regained consciousness in the private wing of New York Presbyterian Hospital, surrounded by worried executives and stone-faced security personnel. His first coherent question surprised everyone present. "The woman who pulled me out, where is she?" Maxwell Reed's private hospital suite resembled a corporate command center more than a recovery room. Laptops hummed as his team managed the fallout from his abrupt departure from the gala. Outside, journalists camped in the lobby, feeding the public's insatiable appetite for news about the reclusive billionaire's mysterious accident. "We've released a statement citing exhaustion and dehydration," Victoria explained, scrolling through her tablet. "The board has been assured you'll make a full recovery. Dr. Lennox has agreed to sign off on whatever medical narrative we provide." Maxwell barely registered her words. For 3 days, he had asked the same question. Who saved me? Each time his security team delivered the same response, they were working on it. Enough, Maxwell finally said, sitting upright despite the protest of sore muscles. Find her. Use whatever resources necessary. Eleanor Reed, Maxwell's older sister and temporary CEO during his hospitalization, frowned from her position by the window. Max, you need to focus on recovery, not chasing some random Good Samaritan. The press is already speculating wildly. Adding a mysterious rescuer to the narrative will only fuel their frenzy. At 60, Eleanor embodied the Reed family's aristocratic bearing. Her silver-streaked black hair was pulled into a severe bun, her posture impeccable, even after a 70-hour work week. Since Maxwell's hospitalization, she had maintained strict control over both the company and the narrative surrounding her brother's incident. This isn't about press, Eleanor, Maxwell replied, his voice gaining strength. This is personal. Eleanor's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her arm. Nothing in our position is ever truly personal, Maxwell. You taught me that. 2 days later, Maxwell was discharged and returned to his penthouse. By then, his security team had identified Amara Johnson through surveillance footage from nearby buildings. The dossier on his desk contained her photograph, address, employment history, and financial records, a life reduced to clinical data points. Maxwell studied her image, a woman with warm brown skin, natural hair pulled back from a face that radiated quiet determination. According to the file, she taught at a struggling public school in Brooklyn, lived in a rent-controlled apartment that needed repairs, and carried student loan debt despite her master's degree in education. Would you like us to arrange a meeting, sir? His head of security asked. No, Maxwell replied, I'll handle this personally. The next morning, Maxwell's Rolls-Royce parked outside Riverside Community High School, drawing curious stares from students entering the building. He ignored his driver's concerned expression as he stepped out, dressed in a suit that cost more than most teachers' monthly salaries. Inside, the hallways fell silent as he passed. A security guard directed him to the principal's office, where a harried woman looked up from a mountain of paperwork, her eyes widening in recognition. Mr. Reed? Maxwell Reed. What brings you to Riverside? I'm looking for Amara Johnson. Minutes later, Maxwell stood outside Amara's classroom, observing through the door's window. She moved energetically among the students, gesturing enthusiastically as she discussed a passage from Their Eyes Were Watching God. The teenagers, many of whom probably faced significant challenges outside school walls, were engaged, hands raised, opinions offered. When the bell rang, Maxwell stepped aside as students exited. Only then did he enter the now empty classroom. Amara looked up from erasing the whiteboard, recognition dawning slowly on her face. You're the man from the river, she said simply. And you're the woman who saved my life, Maxwell replied. I came to thank you properly. Amara set down the eraser, dusting chalk from her hands. That's not necessary. I disagree, Maxwell said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. I'd like to express my gratitude. Amara's eyes narrowed as she recognized the gesture. She'd seen enough movies to know what was happening. Mr. Reed, I appreciate the gesture, but I didn't pull you from the water for a reward, nevertheless. No, Amara said firmly, raising her hand. If it was someone else in that river, anyone else, I would have jumped just the same. The simplicity of her statement struck Maxwell with unexpected force. Throughout his life, every interaction had been transactional. Services rendered, compensation provided, ledgers balanced. Yet here stood a woman refusing the equation entirely. Then perhaps you'll allow me to take you to dinner, as a thank you. Amara glanced at the clock. I have another class in 5 minutes, Mr. Reed, and honestly, our worlds are very different. I'm not sure what we'd discuss over dinner. The value of human life, perhaps, Maxwell suggested, an unfamiliar vulnerability creeping into his voice. You seem to have a clearer understanding of it than I do. Something in his tone gave Amara pause. She studied him, not the billionaire whose face occasionally appeared in news headlines, but the man whose lifeless body she had dragged from the river, whose chest had risen under her hands as she breathed life back into him. "I have community literacy classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays," she said finally. "But I'm free this Saturday afternoon. There's a cafe near Prospect Park where we could meet for coffee. Nothing fancy." Maxwell nodded, accepting her terms. As he turned to leave, Amara called after him. "Mr. Reed, why were you in the river that night?" He paused at the doorway. "I'm still figuring that out myself." Over the next 2 weeks, Maxwell and Amara's coffee meeting extended into a walk through Prospect Park, which led to a visit to the Brooklyn Museum, followed by dinner at a small Ethiopian restaurant Amara frequented. Each encounter revealed the vast differences in their worlds and the surprising similarities in their current struggles. During their 4th meeting, as they sat on a park bench watching children play, Amara finally shared her pregnancy. "Twins," she said, her hand resting protectively on her still flat abdomen. "The father isn't involved, he made that very clear." Maxwell listened as she described her plans, working until delivery, taking a brief maternity leave, arranging childcare, with a neighbor who watched other teachers' children. "It will be challenging," she admitted, "but my students face harder obstacles every day. If they can persevere, so can I." Maxwell hesitated before speaking. "Earlier this month, I learned I'm infertile. That was the day I ended up in the river." Amara's expression softened. "I'm sorry, Maxwell. In my family, legacy is defined by bloodline. Without children, what remains of me when I'm gone? Just money changing hands, buildings with my name that will eventually be renamed, companies that will be absorbed or dissolved. Legacy isn't just DNA," Amara replied gently. "It's impact. Look at my students. Many come from broken homes, face violence, poverty. But when someone believes in them, shows them possibilities beyond their circumstances, they flourish. That's legacy too." As their unlikely friendship developed, word inevitably reached Eleanor Reed. The security reports on her desk detailed Maxwell's increasingly frequent visits to Brooklyn, the time spent with the teacher, their conversations in public places. "Eleanor," summoned her assistant, "find out everything about this woman. Not just the basics. I want detailed background, family history, past relationships, financial vulnerabilities. Everyone has leverage points. Find hers." When Maxwell arrived at her office the following day, Eleanor was prepared. "This needs to stop, Max," she said without preamble, pushing a folder across her desk. "The board is concerned. Our major investors in Saudi Arabia and the UAE are traditional people. They won't understand why the head of Reed Corporation is suddenly spending time in Brooklyn tenements with a pregnant schoolteacher." Maxwell didn't touch the folder. "My personal life is not the board's concern. Everything you do reflects on this company," Eleanor countered. "Her company our father and grandfather built through discipline, strategic marriages, and adherence to tradition. You think this woman saved you by chance, that this isn't some elaborate play for Reed money?" Maxwell's jaw tightened. "You didn't see her face when she refused my check, Eleanor. She wanted nothing from me." "Everyone wants something," Eleanor insisted. "I've hired investigators to look into her background. Give me time to ensure she's not a threat before you." "Continue this, whatever this is." Maxwell stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Cancel the investigation, Eleanor. My personal choices are not subject to board approval." As he left his sister's office, Maxwell felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, the stirring of defiance against the rigid structures that had defined his existence. Meanwhile, Amara faced her own challenges. Morning sickness had intensified, making classroom management increasingly difficult. Her doctor had expressed concerns about her blood pressure and recommended reducing her workload, advice that was financially impossible to follow. When she returned to her apartment one evening, she found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a letter from her landlord indicating that an anonymous benefactor had paid for comprehensive renovations to her unit, including new appliances, plumbing, electrical work, and climate control. The work would begin the following week, with temporary accommodation provided in a nearby hotel. Amara immediately called Maxwell. "Did you do this?" she demanded when he answered. "Do what?" His tone was carefully neutral. "Don't play games, Maxwell. The apartment renovations. Was it you?" After a pause, he replied, "You mentioned the heating was unreliable and with the pregnancy. So you just decided to step in and fix my life?" "Without asking. I was trying to help," Maxwell said, genuine confusion in his voice. "Is that wrong?" Amara sighed, her anger deflating into exhaustion. "You can't just throw money at people's problems, Maxwell. That's not how real relationships work." "Then teach me," he said quietly. "How do real relationships work?" The vulnerability in his question caught her off guard. For a man who controlled billion-dollar negotiations, this seemingly simple human interaction was foreign territory. "They start with respect," Amara finally answered. "With asking, not assuming. With seeing the other person as an equal, not a project." The line fell silent for several heartbeats before Maxwell spoke again. "I apologize. Would you allow me to help, Amara? Not because I pity you or see you as a charity case, but because I care about your well-being and that of your children?" Something in his phrasing, "your children," touched her. Unlike others who had offered help wrapped in judgment, Maxwell's concern seemed genuine if awkwardly expressed. "We can talk about it," she conceded. "But Maxwell, next time, ask first." Eleanor Reed had not built her reputation as the Iron Lady of Wall Street by accepting defeat easily. While Maxwell believed he had ended the investigation into Amara Johnson, Eleanor had merely transferred it to a more discreet team with instructions to dig deeper. "Everyone has secrets," she told Bradley Wheeler, her most trusted legal advisor, as they reviewed preliminary findings in her private office. "Find hers." Bradley adjusted his glasses. "So far, Ms. Johnson appears remarkably clean. No criminal record, excellent. Credit, despite modest income, respected in her community. The only notable event was a tragedy 5 years ago." Eleanor leaned forward. "What tragedy?" "She was engaged to another teacher, Marcus Bennett. During a school field trip to upstate New York, one of their students wandered off near a river. Bennett jumped in to save the child, but suffered a heart attack in the water. The student survived. Bennett did not. Ms. Johnson was 3 months pregnant at the time and lost the baby shortly after." Eleanor frowned, tapping her manicured nails against the mahogany desk. "So, our heroic teacher has a pattern of losing men to water and then playing the grieving victim. Interesting." "That's a rather cynical interpretation," Bradley remarked cautiously. "I protect this family's interest, Bradley. Cynicism is a professional requirement." Eleanor closed the file and stood, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. "Keep digging. Focus on her finances. Everyone has a price. We just need to find hers." Across the city, Maxwell and Amara were establishing boundaries and building an unexpected friendship. After their conversation about the apartment renovations, Maxwell had stepped back, allowing Amara to determine the nature and pace of their relationship. On a crisp Saturday morning, Maxwell accompanied Amara to her prenatal appointment, waiting in the reception area until she invited him to join her for the ultrasound. "Are you sure?" he asked, standing hesitantly at the examination room door. Amara nodded. "I'd like someone to be there for this moment. Someone who won't vanish when things get complicated." Inside, the technician moved the wand over Amara's growing abdomen, revealing 2 distinct forms on the monitor. "Twin girls," she announced. Both developing normally. Maxwell found himself unexpectedly moved by the grainy black and white images. These lives, unrelated to him by blood, stirred something protective and profound within him. When Amara reached for his hand during a moment of discomfort, he held it without hesitation. Afterward, over lunch at a small cafe near the hospital, Amara noticed Maxwell's thoughtful expression. "You're a million miles away," she observed. "Everything okay?" Maxwell set down his coffee cup. "I was thinking about what you said about legacy, about impact versus bloodline." And I'm beginning to understand," he admitted. "Seeing those heartbeats today, lives that will exist in this world, shaped by your values, your strength, It's a different kind of immortality than what I was raised to pursue. Amara smiled. Children aren't just vessels for our ambitions or extensions of ourselves. They're their own people, with their own paths. The greatest gift we can give them is the freedom to become whoever they're meant to be. Maxwell nodded slowly. That wasn't the Reed family philosophy. My father saw me primarily as a caretaker for his empire. My value was measured by how effectively I could protect and expand what previous generations had built. That sounds lonely, Amara said gently. It was, Maxwell agreed, the simple admission surprising even himself. It is. Their conversation was interrupted by Maxwell's phone buzzing with an urgent message from Victoria. A crisis had emerged. With their West Coast operations, his immediate attention was required. Go, Amara urged when he hesitated. Your company needs you. Can I check on you tomorrow? Maxwell asked, already gathering his things. I'll be grading papers all weekend. But yes, Amara replied, I'd like that. As Maxwell's car navigated through Manhattan traffic, he found himself making a decision. After resolving the immediate business crisis, he spent the next week in meetings with his estate planning team, financial advisors, and attorneys. By Friday, papers were drawn up establishing the Amara Johnson Education Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million. The foundation would provide scholarships for underprivileged students, fund teacher training programs, and support literacy initiatives across New York's most underserved communities. When he presented the documents to Amara over dinner at her newly renovated apartment, her reaction wasn't what he expected. I can't accept this, she said, pushing the folder away without opening it. It's not for you personally, Maxwell explained. It's to expand the work you're already doing, to help more students like yours. Amara shook her head. You're still trying to solve problems with money, Maxwell. That's the only language you know. Then what would you suggest? He asked, genuinely, curious rather than defensive. Amara considered the question. If you want to make a real difference, don't just write a check, get involved, meet my students, understand their challenges firsthand, use your influence to change systems, not just symptoms. The following Monday, Maxwell Reed walked into Riverside Community High School wearing khakis and a button-down shirt instead of his usual bespoke suit. For the next month, he spent 3 afternoons a week mentoring seniors on business skills, college applications, and professional development. The students were initially intimidated by his reputation, but soon responded to his direct approach and genuine interest in their futures. Maxwell found himself energized by their resilience, creativity, and hunger for opportunity, qualities he recognized from his own early days building the company before paperwork and protocol had consumed his life. Eleanor watched these developments with mounting concern. The press had caught wind of Maxwell Reed's involvement at the Brooklyn school, spinning tales of the billionaire teacher that threatened the carefully cultivated image of Reed Corporation. More alarming were the whispers among board members about Maxwell's state of mind. He's established a pattern of erratic behavior, she told the company's lead counsel. First the incident at the gala, then the river, now this public school crusade. As his medical proxy and second largest shareholder, I have concerns about his decision-making capacity. The attorney's expression remained neutral. Are you suggesting we explore options regarding temporary leadership transition? I'm suggesting we protect both Maxwell and the company from potential harm, Eleanor replied smoothly. Draft the paperwork. Quietly. While Eleanor maneuvered behind the scenes, Amara's pregnancy progressed with complications. At 24 weeks, her doctor ordered bed rest due to signs of preterm labor risk. Unable to continue teaching, she faced both financial strain and profound isolation in her apartment. Maxwell arranged for the best maternal fetal medicine specialists to consult on her case and hired a home health aide to assist with daily needs. But more significantly, he simply showed up, bringing books to read aloud, discussing her students' progress, or sometimes just sitting quietly while they both worked. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Amara finally asked the question that had lingered between them for months. Why are you really here, Maxwell? What do you want from me? Maxwell set aside the financial report he'd been reviewing. Do I need an ulterior motive? In my experience, people usually have one, Amara replied, especially people with power. Maxwell considered her words carefully before responding. When you pulled me from that river, you saw me not as Maxwell, Reed CEO or the Reed family heir, but simply as a human being worth saving. No one had looked at me that way in decades, perhaps ever. He leaned forward in his chair. You asked why I was in the river that night. The truth is, I had just learned I could never have biological children. In my family's value system, that made me a failure, the end of a dynastic line. Everything I'd built suddenly seemed meaningless. Amara's expression softened. And now? Now I'm questioning everything I've been taught about worth, legacy, and connection, Maxwell admitted. You and these children have shown me possibilities I never considered. So why am I here? Because this is the only place where I feel like more than a balance sheet, where I'm learning to be human. The vulnerability of his confession hung in the air between them. Amara reached out, taking his hand in hers. For what it's worth, she said softly, I think you're doing a pretty good job at being human. Their moment was interrupted by Amara's sudden gasp, her hand flying to her abdomen. What is it? Maxwell asked, alarm rising in his voice. The babies. They're kicking, Amara whispered, her face breaking into a smile. She guided his hand to the spot. Feel. Maxwell held perfectly still as tiny movements pressed against his palm. Something fundamental shifted within him at that moment, a connection that transcended biology, bloodlines, and business empires. Meanwhile, across town, Eleanor, Reed signed the final documents, initiating a competency evaluation of her brother, the first step in a complex legal strategy to wrest control of Reed Corporation from his hands. The petition cited his increasingly erratic behavior, emotional instability following medical trauma, and potentially compromising personal associations. The New York winter arrived with unusual ferocity, blanketing the city in snow and ice. Maxwell was reviewing architectural plans for a new community literacy center in Brooklyn when Victoria burst into his office, her typically composed demeanor visibly shaken. Sir, there's something you need to see immediately, she said, placing a tablet in front of him. On the screen was a breaking news article from the Wall Street Journal. Read, Corporation Board calls emergency meeting amid concerns over CEO's mental fitness. The article detailed a petition filed by Eleanor Reed, requesting a formal evaluation of her brother's competency to lead the company, citing his erratic behavior following a near-fatal incident. Maxwell's expression hardened as he scrolled through the article. Get my legal team here now. Within the hour, his office had transformed into a war room. Attorneys, PR specialists, and trusted executives gathered as Maxwell paced before the floor-to-ceiling windows. They're using the river incident as evidence of suicidal ideation, his lead counsel explained. Combined with your changed behavior patterns and association with Ms. Johnson, Eleanor is suggesting you're experiencing some form of post-traumatic stress disorder or mental breakdown. Can she do this? Maxwell asked. Legally, yes. As your medical proxy and a major shareholder, she has standing to raise concerns. The board must investigate. And if they find me unfit, the attorney hesitated. Temporary removal from operational duties at minimum. Possibly permanent replacement if the evaluation suggests ongoing impairment. Maxwell turned to Victoria. Schedule a board meeting. Tomorrow. Sir, the blizzard. Tomorrow, Maxwell repeated firmly, and find out if any news outlets have contacted Amara. She doesn't need this stress in her condition. As his team dispersed to execute his directives, Maxwell's private line rang. It was Amara's home health aide, her voice tight with urgency. Mr. Reed, Ms. Johnson is being transported to Mount Sinai. Her blood pressure spiked dangerously, and one of the babies is showing signs of distress. She's asking for you. Maxwell dropped everything. Tell her I'm on my way. The storm had intensified, transforming Manhattan into a treacherous landscape of white. Traffic crawled through snow-choked streets as Maxwell's driver navigated toward the hospital. When an accident completely blocked their path, Maxwell didn't hesitate. I'll continue on foot, he told the driver, already pulling on his overcoat. "Sir, it's 15 blocks in a blizzard. Then I better start walking." Maxwell Reed, who normally traveled with security details and private elevators, trudged through knee-deep snow, his Italian leather shoes ruined within minutes. The biting wind cut through his inadequate clothing, but he pressed forward, driven by something stronger than discomfort or corporate crises. When he finally arrived at Mount Sinai, soaked and freezing, the emergency department staff didn't recognize the bedraggled man asking for Amara Johnson. Only when he provided identification did a nurse hurriedly escort him to the maternity floor. Dr. Sarah Chen met him outside Amara's room. "Ms. Johnson's condition is precarious. Preeclampsia has developed rapidly, and one twin is showing decreased movement. We're preparing for an emergency C-section." "Will they survive?" Maxwell asked, his voice raw. "The babies and Amara?" "We're doing everything possible," Dr. Chen replied, her expression guarded. "Ms. Johnson has been asking for you. You can see her briefly before we take her to surgery." Inside the room, Amara lay connected to multiple monitors, her face drawn, with pain and fear. When she saw Maxwell, disheveled, wet, his normally perfect appearance completely undone, her eyes filled with tears. "You came through the storm," she whispered as he took her hand. "Of course I did," he replied simply. I promised you wouldn't face this alone, and I meant it." Amara squeezed his hand as another contraction gripped her. The monitors beeped more rapidly. "I'm scared, Maxwell," she admitted. "It's too early. They're only 28 weeks." "Doctor Chen is one of the best neonatologists in the country," Maxwell assured her, trying to keep his own fear from his voice. "And these daughters of yours are fighters, like their mother." A nurse entered to adjust Amara's medications and check the monitors. "We need to move to the OR now," she announced, her tone brooking no argument. Maxwell leaned down to kiss Amara's forehead. "I'll be right here waiting. Promise me something," Amara whispered urgently as they prepared to wheel her away. "If something happens to me—" "Don't," Maxwell interrupted. "Listen to me," Amara insisted. "If I don't make it, don't let my girls end up in the system. Find them a good home, people who will love them for who they are, not what they could become." Before Maxwell could respond, the medical team moved her bed toward the doors. He stood frozen in the empty room, the weight of her request settling over him like a mantle. In the waiting area, Maxwell paced relentlessly, checking his watch every few minutes. His phone buzzed constantly with messages about the board meeting, but he silenced it, his priorities suddenly crystalline in their clarity. After 2 hours that felt like eternity, Dr. Chen appeared in surgical scrubs, her expression serious but not grave. "Ms. Johnson came through the surgery," she reported. "She lost a significant amount of blood and remains in critical condition, but she's stable for now." "And the babies?" Maxwell asked, his voice barely audible. "Both. Girls are alive but extremely premature. They're in the NICU on ventilators. The next 24 to 48 hours will be crucial." Maxwell followed Dr. Chen to the neonatal intensive care unit, where he stood before 2 incubators containing impossibly tiny beings connected to a constellation of tubes and wires. Each baby was smaller than his hand, their translucent skin revealing the delicate network of veins beneath. "Can I?" He gestured helplessly toward them. A NICU nurse approached. "You can place your hands through these ports," she demonstrated. "Gentle touch is actually beneficial, even at this stage." Maxwell carefully inserted his hands into the incubator containing the smaller of the twins. His finger, when placed against her miniature palm, was immediately gripped with surprising strength. "Hello, little one," he whispered, a lump forming in his throat. "Your mother is fighting hard, so you need to fight too." For the next 3 days, Maxwell barely left the hospital, dividing his time between Amara's bedside and the NICU. He slept in short bursts on waiting room chairs, used the hospital's public showers, and wore scrubs provided by sympathetic staff. His phone continued to buzz with increasingly urgent messages about Reed Corporation, but they seemed to come from another world entirely. On the 4th morning, as Maxwell dozed, in a chair beside Amara's bed, her eyes finally opened. Seeing her conscious, Maxwell moved immediately to her side. "The babies?" she asked. her voice hoarse from the intubation tube that had been removed the previous day. "They're hanging in there," Maxwell said, taking her hand. "Still on breathing support, but the doctors say they're showing remarkable resilience. Just like their mother." Tears slid down Amara's cheeks. "I need to see them." "As soon as you're stronger," he promised. "Dr. Chen doesn't want you moved yet." Amara studied his face, the stubble that had grown into a beard, the dark circles under his eyes, the hospital scrubs replacing his customary suit. "You've been here the whole time?" "Where else would I be?" he asked simply. "Running your empire," she replied. "Don't think I haven't noticed all those messages you're ignoring." Maxwell shrugged. "The company can survive without me for a few days." "Maxwell," Amara said, her tone sharpening despite her weakness, "what aren't you telling me?" He hesitated, then decided she deserved the truth. "My sister has raised questions about my competency to lead Reed Corporation. There's a board meeting today to discuss the matter." Amara's eyes widened. "Because of me?" "Because Eleanor has never accepted anyone challenging her vision of what the Reed legacy should be," Maxwell corrected. "This was inevitable from the moment I started making decisions she couldn't control." "You need to go," Amara insisted. "You can't lose your company over this." Maxwell shook his head. "The company doesn't matter if—" "It does matter," Amara interrupted. "It's part of who you are. And those girls in the NICU need you strong and whole, not broken and bitter over what you've lost." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Eleanor Reed's authoritative voice could be heard demanding to see her brother, hospital policy notwithstanding. Maxwell squeezed Amara's hand. "I should handle this." In the corridor, Eleanor stood ramrod straight in an immaculate camel hair coat, flanked by two men Maxwell recognized as board members. "So it's true," Eleanor said coldly. "You've abandoned your responsibilities to play nursemaid to this woman and her premature offspring." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "Choose your next. Words very carefully, Eleanor." "The board meeting begins in 2 hours," Eleanor continued, unintimidated. "Your absence will be noted and interpreted as confirmation of our concerns about your judgment. I'm dealing with a life-or-death situation here. You're dealing with the consequences of your own inexplicable behavior," Eleanor corrected. "First the incident at the gala, then the river, now this obsession with a schoolteacher and her illegitimate children. What happened to you, Maxwell? Where is the brother who understood his duty to the Reed name?" "He nearly drowned," Maxwell replied evenly, "and when he came back to the surface, he saw things differently." Eleanor's expression hardened. "I've spent 40 years protecting this family's legacy. I won't stand by while you dismantle it over some misguided savior complex." "This isn't about being a savior," Maxwell replied. "It's about being human." Eleanor glanced toward Amara's room. "That woman has no idea what world she's stumbled into. By the time I'm finished, she'll wish she'd let you drown." Maxwell stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Threaten her again and you'll discover exactly how much of our father lives on in me." The siblings stared at each other, decades of complicated history hanging between them. Finally, Eleanor adjusted her coat. 2 hours, Maxwell, make your choice." After she left, Maxwell returned to Amara's room to find her attempting to get out of bed. "What are you doing?" he asked, rushing to support her. "Going to that board. Meeting with you," Amara replied grimly, wincing with pain. "I won't be the reason you lose everything." "Lie back down," Maxwell insisted gently. "You'll tear your incision." "But your company—" "Will still be there tomorrow," he said firmly. "Right now, you and those little girls need me more." Later. That afternoon, as Amara slept, Maxwell sat in the NICU between the two incubators. A nurse had shown him how to do kangaroo care, holding each tiny infant against his bare chest to provide warmth and human contact. As the smaller twin nestled against him, her miniature hand splayed across his heart, Maxwell made his decision. The board meeting convened without him, Eleanor presiding in his absence. By unanimous vote, Maxwell Reed was temporarily relieved of his duties as CEO of Reed Corporation, pending psychological evaluation. The news of Maxwell Reed's removal as CEO spread through financial markets like wildfire. Reed Corporation stock dropped 12 points in the first hour of trading. Business networks ran continuous coverage, speculating about the billionaire's mental state and the future of the corporate giant. Outside Mount Sinai Hospital, paparazzi gathered hoping for a glimpse of the fallen titan or the mysterious teacher who had allegedly enchanted him. Inside, Maxwell remained in a bubble of surreal calm, focused entirely on the three lives that had unexpectedly become the center of his universe. He hired additional security to protect Amara's privacy and arranged for the hospital's best private suite when she was strong enough to be moved from intensive care. "The media is saying I've had some kind of breakdown," Maxwell told Amara 6 days after the births as they sat together in the NICU. Both babies, whom Amara had named Zora and Maya, were showing small but steady improvements. "That you've manipulated me into abandoning my responsibilities." Amara, still weak but recovering, reached for his hand. "And what do you think?" "I think I've never seen things more clearly," Maxwell replied. "Eleanor and the board believe I'm making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. They don't understand that I'm finally making decisions based on values rather than valuation." A nurse approached, smiling. "Ms. Johnson, Mr. Reed, we have some good news. Baby Maya's lung function has improved enough that we're going to try taking her off the ventilator, and Zora gained another ounce overnight." These small victories had become Maxwell's new measure of success. The world outside might be speculating about corporate takeovers and shareholder confidence, but here, an ounce of weight gain felt like winning the lottery. 3 days later, Victoria arrived at the hospital with a large envelope. "The board's official notice of temporary removal," she explained, handing it to Maxwell. "They've scheduled a competency hearing for next month. Eleanor is serving as interim CEO." Maxwell scanned the documents. "And the shareholder reaction?" "Mixed. The major institutional investors are concerned, but waiting to see how this plays out. Your personal reputation is still strong. Many see this as a family disagreement, rather than genuine leadership instability." "And the education initiative?" Victoria smiled slightly. "Eleanor tried to cancel it, but the public announcement had already generated too much positive press. Scaling it back now would look terrible, especially with the current narrative." "Good," Maxwell nodded. "Make sure the first disbursements proceed as planned, regardless of my official status." That evening, Maxwell found Amara in the NICU, reading "Their Eyes Were Watching God" aloud to the twins. Though still connected to monitors, both girls were now breathing unassisted and gaining weight steadily. Maxwell stood quietly in the doorway, listening to Amara's gentle voice speaking Zora Neale Hurston's powerful words to her daughters. She had been getting ready for her great journey to the horizons in search of people. It was important to all the world that she should find them and they find her. Amara read, unaware of Maxwell's presence. The simple scene, a mother reading to her children, struck Maxwell with unexpected force. This was what had been missing from his life. Not descendants to carry on his name or inheritors for his wealth, but this fundamental human connection, this quiet intimacy that no corporate acquisition could provide. Amara looked up, finally noticing him. "How long have you been standing there?" "Not long enough," he replied softly. 2 weeks later, after what doctors called a remarkably smooth recovery for such premature infants, Zora and Maya were deemed strong enough to leave the NICU. However, they would still require specialized care and monitoring for several months. "I need to figure out how to manage this," Amara said as they prepared for discharge, worry creasing her brow. "My apartment isn't really set up for preemies with medical needs, and I'll have to go back to teaching eventually. The family medical leave only covers so long." Maxwell had been anticipating this conversation. "I have a suggestion, but I want you to hear the whole proposal before responding." He outlined a plan. The 3rd floor of his townhouse could be converted into a self-contained apartment for Amara and the twins. A pediatric nurse would be available around the clock for the first 3 months. When Amara was ready to return to work, quality childcare would be arranged. There would be no strings attached. She would retain complete independence and authority regarding her daughters. This isn't about control or financial rescue, Maxwell emphasized. It's about providing stability during a critical time. You can stay a week, a month, or as long as you need. Amara studied him carefully. And what do you get from this arrangement? Time, Maxwell answered honestly. Time to be part of their lives. Time to learn what it means to care for someone without expecting anything in return. Time with you, if you're willing. After careful consideration, Amara agreed to a 3-month arrangement, with clear boundaries established. As they settled into this new routine, Maxwell prepared for his competency hearing. His legal team had built a strong case, demonstrating his continued business acumen and decision-making capacity. Psychological evaluations showed no evidence of mental instability, merely a shift in personal priorities following a life-threatening experience, a change many would consider healthy rather than concerning. The night before the hearing, Maxwell found Amara in the library, the twins sleeping peacefully in bassinets beside her. She was reviewing student essays that her colleagues had sent over. "Nervous about tomorrow?" she asked, setting aside her work. "Not really," Maxwell replied, joining her on the sofa. "Whatever happens with Reed Corporation, I've already made my peace with it." "You've worked your entire life for that company," Amara observed. "Are you sure you're ready to walk away if necessary?" Maxwell considered her question carefully. The company was never the goal, it was the means. "My father taught me that power and wealth were the only true securities in life. But holding those tiny girls, watching them fight for every breath, it changed something fundamental in me." He took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "When I was in that river drowning, my last thought wasn't about stock prices or mergers. It was regret for a life half-lived, for connections never formed. Then you pulled me out, and somehow you kept pulling not just my body from the water, but my soul from the isolation I'd built around it." Amara's eyes glistened. "That works both ways, you know. After losing Marcus and our baby, I closed myself off. I poured everything into my students because it felt safer than risking my heart again. Then these two came along." She nodded toward Say, the sleeping infants. "And you showed up refusing to be pushed away. Refusing to let me face it alone." Maxwell's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "Where do we go from here, Amara?" "One day at a time," she replied, "building something real, something honest." The board hearing the next morning was less confrontational than anticipated. Eleanor presented her case methodically, citing Maxwell's erratic behavior and emotional decisions as evidence of impaired judgment. Maxwell's team countered with financial reports showing the company's stability during his absence and testimony regarding the common psychological impact of near-death experiences. When it was Maxwell's turn to address the board, he approached the podium without notes. "For 30 years I've dedicated myself to this company," he began. "In that time, Reed Corporation has tripled in value, expanded into 17 new markets, and weathered economic downturns that destroyed our competitors. My commitment to this institution is a matter of record." He paused, surveying the faces watching him intently. "But a corporation exists to serve people, not the other way around. Recent events have reminded me that profit without purpose is ultimately meaningless. I nearly died thinking I had failed because I couldn't produce an heir. What a tragic, limited view of legacy." Eleanor shifted uncomfortably in her seat as Maxwell continued. "I'm not here to defend my competency. My record speaks for itself. I'm here to present a new vision for Reed Corporation, one that balances profit with social responsibility, that measures success not just by dividends but by impact. If that vision aligns with yours, I will continue to lead this company with renewed purpose. If not, I'll step aside, retaining my shares but relinquishing operational control." A murmur spread through the boardroom. This wasn't the desperate defense they had expected. "To demonstrate my commitment to this new direction," Maxwell continued, "I'm establishing a personal trust separate from my holdings in Reed Corporation. This trust will fund educational initiatives in underserved communities, starting with New York, but eventually expanding nationwide. This isn't about publicity or tax benefits. It's about recognizing that true legacy comes from impact, not inheritance." Maxwell looked directly at Eleanor, his expression softening slightly. My sister and I disagree on many things, but we both care deeply about this company's future. If the board believes she will be a more effective leader, I will support that decision without rancor or interference. What I will not do is pretend to be the man I was before the river. That man is gone. Whether you find his replacement more or less valuable is for you to decide. After 3 hours of deliberation, the board delivered their verdict. Maxwell would be reinstated as CEO with certain conditions. A co-leadership structure would be implemented, with Eleanor focusing on international operations, while Maxwell directed domestic business and the new social impact initiatives. Quarterly psychological evaluations would continue for 1 year to ensure stability. As the members filed out, Eleanor approached her brother. Her posture remained rigid, but something in her eyes had changed. You had this planned all along, she said, not quite accusatory. Not at all, Maxwell replied honestly. I was prepared to walk away. And the woman, the children. Their names are Amara, Zora, and Maya, Maxwell corrected gently. And they're not negotiable, Eleanor. They're family now, whether you understand that or not. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. You really have changed. For the better, I hope. That remains to be seen, she replied, but without the coldness that had characterized their recent interactions. The Reed name has meant something specific for generations. This recalibration will take some adjustment. Change always does, Maxwell acknowledged. But maybe it's time for the Reed name to mean something more than wealth and power. Maybe it can also stand for compassion, for second chances. Eleanor gathered her papers, her movements precise and controlled as always. I've scheduled a trip to our Middle Eastern offices next week. We should discuss strategy before I leave. It wasn't acceptance, Maxwell knew, but it was a beginning. In the months that followed, Maxwell navigated his dual roles, corporate leader and family man, with growing confidence. The temporary living arrangement with Amara evolved naturally as the twins thrived under their shared care. The third-floor apartment remained Amara's private domain, but increasingly, evenings were spent together in the library or the garden room Maxwell had added specifically for family meals. Amara returned to teaching part-time, her classroom now, frequently hosting guest speakers from various professions thanks to Maxwell's connections. The Education Foundation flourished, expanding from scholarship programs to include teacher training initiatives, technology grants, and community literacy centers. One evening, nearly a year after the river incident, Maxwell found Amara in the nursery, watching the twins sleep. Now healthy, chubby-cheeked toddlers, Zora and Maya had just taken their first steps that day, holding each other's hands as they wobbled across the playroom floor. They're incredible, Maxwell said softly, standing beside her. So determined, so fearless. Like their mother, Amara smiled, leaning against him. And like the man who chose to love them, she added, turning to face him fully. Maxwell, I've been thinking about something. That sounds serious, he replied, leading her to the window seat where they often talked after the girls were asleep. It is, Amara confirmed. The girls are getting older. They're starting to form memories, understanding relationships. We need to decide what we are to each other, what you are to them. Maxwell took her hands in his. What do you want us to be? A real family, Amara said simply. Not just convenient living arrangements or friendly co-parenting. I want them to know you're their father in every way that matters, legally, emotionally, permanently. Maxwell's heart swelled. Are you asking me to adopt them? I'm asking for more than that, Amara replied, her voice steady despite the vulnerability in her eyes. I'm asking if you want to build a life together. Not because of the girls, but because of what's grown between us. Because somewhere between the river and now, I fell in love with you. Maxwell drew her closer. I think I started falling the moment you refused my check and told me you would have jumped for anyone. No one had ever seen me as just a person. Before, not my wealth or my name, but me. Their first kiss was gentle, a confirmation of feelings that had developed slowly, authentically, over shared midnight feedings and hospital vigils, book discussions and quiet evenings. 3 months. Later, they were married in a simple ceremony in Prospect Park. The twins, dressed in matching yellow dresses, toddled down the aisle, scattering flower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Eleanor attended, her customary reserve softened by the genuine joy evident on her brother's face. Maxwell's students from Riverside High School served as ushers, many now enrolled in college thanks to foundation scholarships. Following the ceremony, the adoption was formalized, making official what Maxwell had felt in his heart since those first moments in the NICU. These girls were his daughters in every way that mattered. The family settled into a renovated brownstone in Brooklyn, closer to Amara's school. Maxwell continued his corporate duties, but delegated more day-to-day operations, allowing him to be home for dinner most evenings and never missing important family moments. On the twins' second birthday, Maxwell and Amara hosted a celebration at the newest Johnson Reed Literacy Center in Amara's childhood neighborhood. As children from the community enjoyed books, games, and cake, Maxwell stood at the podium to make a brief announcement. 2 years ago, I believed my life was ending, he began, his gaze finding Amara in the crowd. I was wrong. It was just beginning. I thought legacy was about bloodlines and bank accounts, about seeing your name on buildings after you're gone. Now I know better. He gestured to the room full of children engaged in learning and play. Legacy is about impact. It's about the lives you touch, the potential you help unlock. It's about love freely given, with no expectation of return. Maxwell looked at his daughters, now sturdy toddlers racing around with boundless energy. Zora and Maya aren't my biological children, but they are my heart walking around outside my body. Through them, I've learned that family isn't defined by DNA, but by choice. The daily choice to show up, to care, to put someone else's needs before your own. He raised his glass in a toast. To legacy redefined, to second chances, and to the extraordinary woman who not only saved my life, but showed me how to truly live it. Amara joined him at the podium, the twins balanced on her hips. As Maxwell wrapped his arms around his family, he marveled at the journey that had brought them together. A desperate man, a freezing river, and the teacher who had pulled him from the darkness into light. In the years that followed, the Johnson Reed family became known not for their wealth, but for their commitment to educational equity. Literacy centers bearing their name opened in underserved communities across the country. Maxwell gradually transferred more corporate responsibilities to trusted lieutenants, finding greater fulfillment in his family life and philanthropic work. Eleanor, to everyone's surprise, became a devoted aunt, spoiling the twins shamelessly, and eventually establishing a series of STEM scholarships for young women in their honor. The Reed legacy continues, she told her brother, just not as we expected. On cold winter nights, Maxwell often found himself reflecting on that pivotal moment in the river. The surrender, the darkness, then the unexpected salvation. Had he truly intended to end his life that night? He still couldn't answer with certainty. What he knew beyond doubt was that his rescue had been just the beginning of his transformation. Through Amara's love, her daughter's trust, and his own willingness to redefine success, Maxwell Reed had discovered what his years of accumulating wealth and power had never provided: the profound joy of belonging, of mattering not for what he owned but for who he was. The man who had once measured life in profit margins now counted his wealth in bedtime stories, science fair projects, and Sunday morning pancake breakfasts. The corporate titan who had feared leaving no heir had found his immortality not in biological descendants, but in lives changed, opportunities created, and barriers removed. And on each anniversary of that fateful night, Maxwell and Amara would walk along the East River, their girls between them, celebrating not what was lost but what was found, a family forged by choice, strengthened by challenge and bound together by a love that defied expectation, tradition, and fear. Fimda Historia. If you enjoyed the story of Maxwell and Amara, don't miss our collection of equally moving narratives about unexpected connections and second chances. You'll find our special playlist by clicking the link to your left. If this journey touched your heart, Please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore life's complexities and the power of human connection. We can't wait to share more emotional journeys with you. Join the conversation in the comments section below.